We doing this?
Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice.
My name is Mark Scruton. I'm the production designer on Beetlejuice.
I'm David Morison, set decorator on Beetlejuice.
To dig into that aesthetic of the first film, which was that it wanted to feel handcrafted, as opposed to digital or super slick.
And that's the fun of this. There's that feeling that somebody made this, you know, like handmade it.
Something I did quite early on, I went through and screen grabbed the first film, almost frame by frame, and built this reference book. For instance, yes, this was a particular one here with Beetlejuice flyers, because we had to do a similar flyer this time around.
Ew.
There's so many images that were very specific, even down to this sort of detail of how the brickwork opened when the door opens into the afterlife. The key thing to the afterlife, compared to the real-world environments, was that everything was distorted and warped. Whether that was the furniture, whether that was the walls, it had to discombobulate you in that environment.
We wanted it to be like you've been at a party and you've had a bit too much to drink.
One thing we did with the floors, all the checkerboard floors were distorted and deliberately designed to go against the perspective of the sets. So even if the floors aren't actually raked or angled or anything else, you feel like they are. So regularly people would walk on the set and lose their footing because their eyes couldn't figure out what they were looking at. The colour palettes on the film were quite specific to the different areas we were shooting in. So I think because we had so many different environments that had to be separate, so the real world, the afterlife, the model interior, we had to work on different palettes and different ways of showing that. But specifically with the afterlife, it was all about metallics. All the walls were painted initially in a chromy silver colour, and then each one was tinted then into a different, slightly warmer tone or a slightly cooler tone, depending on the worlds we were doing. So Wolf Jackson's office was a slightly warmer, woodier tone because he had the wooden paneling and everything else. The boiler room was slightly more into the green world because Beetlejuice normally came with the green light, but then the real world was much more down to earth. But I think the key thing in the real world was everything was generally more monotone, but then you get the red signature sort of pop, and every set had that in it.
We built the desks because there's 16 desks that were matching.
The desks had to be slightly oversized to make the shrinkers look right, because they've got a whole assembly on, which then puts their head slightly higher, so everything is slightly overscale with them.
For whatever reason, Mark decided to make sloping floors. So to sort of try and make all that secure and work was a challenge. It was fun, but it was a challenge. We had some very large, heavy metal filing cabinets. We had to tie all of those off to the back wall, and I bought some plant pot stands and wedged them under the filing cabinet edges and under chair legs to make everything wonky. I was on the set when Winona Ryder saw the attic set. I think it was the first time she'd seen the model in 40 years. She seemed to be quite emotional about that. We employed an art director, Ian Bunting, who spent weeks looking at Mark's book and the film and drew every building and went off with a model making company that built it.
Like there was in the original film, there's several sequences where we go into the model where everything is scaled up, so you feel like you're inside a model. And one of the key ones, which was prominent in the first one, was the grass. You could tell from watching the original film it was something they'd sourced. We couldn't find anything remotely like it that had that same look, so we had to hand sculpt it and craft it. So we ended up with the grass, which I then sliced up and gave to people as gifts, which is what this is at the end. So everyone had a little piece of
I've got one of those
Beetlejuice
on my
grass.
wall.
My mom grew up here, that old house on the hill.
In the first film, the Deetz house is so ingrained into the psyche of the world. Tim and I had a conversation about it, and he was like, we need to go back. We can't do this film if we don't go back to the original place. We built the whole house again exactly as it had been before, in exactly the same spot. You could still see a little bit of depression in the ground where the original one had been built. This is one of my first little things we did, sitting down and actually studying the house and trying to figure out how we were going to build it. And there's so much of it you don't see in the film as well, so trying to figure out what happens around the back and how everything works.
The waiting room was an iconic set from the first film that we had to sort of reproduce exactly in this film.
The afterlife is filled with the most insanely, horrifically beautiful characters.
When it came to recreating the waiting room set, some of the drawings did exist in the Warner Brothers archive. They're incredibly fragile and they couldn't leave the archive, so we had to have them photographed.
We were literally looking at stills from the film of people sitting on sofas and sort of measuring the size of the lamps next to them by the actors' human proportions. It's the only way we could get a scale. And then they ended up drawing these lamps out, and they were sort of this big, and I was thinking, surely they're not that big, but they are. We had a great still of this leather armchair, and I found this one. It was one of the first ones I saw. It had the same front profile, so we bought it for £10. And when we got it back and took off the soft cushion, it was almost exactly the right shape. The train set was not particularly difficult for us.
It was different for me.
Yeah, it was hard for you, yeah.
what does the tube station look like in the afterlife? There was a train which we managed to rent and brought it back to the studio, and then we completely resculpted the front of it. Again, everything was hand sculpted, so these two poly sculptors created this sort of amazing skull face on the front of it.
Mark was able to get hold of a New York subway carriage. The graphics team put some fantastically witty posters on the inside of. Apart from the clock and some light fittings, there wasn't a great deal for set deck. We did those false perspective tunnels.
Tim wanted to show the train arriving, looking straight down the tunnel, and I was like, well, we've only got 20, 30 feet down the tunnel. We literally put a big film lamp on a tube and pushed it down the thing with an iris on it, so the iris opened up as the train got closer. So you got this huge bright light coming down this forced perspective tunnel.
And on the other side of the platform, they wanted a run of lights. So we got some stanchions and sort of put sort of, you know, industrial looking light fittings on them. But of course, when it's going down the tunnel, we had to make smaller and smaller and smaller. And
then we made the station this sort of irregular shape. The big staircase going up, none of them are the same height, none of them same depth. They're all on different angles. And there's not one straight angle in the entire set, which the dancers absolutely hated me for.
And they're all wearing great big platform shoes.
Huge platform shoes, yeah.
Normally I do a set count, and I probably did for this, and off the top of my head, I would say we did 87 sets.
I think my favourite set piece in Beetlejuice is probably the flashback sequences we did for when we find out how Beetlejuice and Dolores first met. It was all designed on this big angle. We had a huge painted backing with a cutout of a moon hanging that was painted silver so it reflected the light.
My favourite set piece was Jeremy's bedroom. There's a lot of me in that set.
That was the one you were happiest in.
Yeah.
It was meant to be this retro teen bedroom, 90s based, and
yeah, exactly.
Your musical knowledge was invaluable, so I just said, go away and make it real.
Definitely, it reminded me of my youth. It was a bit bigger than my bedroom was.
Let's go, honey.
Working on Beetlejuice, it was really a chance to explore what Tim really wanted to do. This was his pet project that he'd been gestising for sort of 30 years.
It's a fantastic script. It was a unique bunch of sets to be asked to do, and a fantastic challenge.